Have you ever stared at a simple plastic device and felt the entire world shift under your feet? I was standing in the hallway of our Chicago brownstone, the faint scent of my wife's perfume still hanging in the air, a brand new carbon monoxide detector in my hand. The old one lay on the floor, its battery compartment empty. She'd told me it was malfunctioning, chirping randomly. But as I stared at the pristine, unconnected wires she'd left behind, cold dread, sharp and acidic, began to crawl up my spine. It wasn't just the detector she'd disabled. Something else was wrong. Something vital had been silenced in our home. And the silence was screaming a warning I was only just beginning to understand. You genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. For a year, I had been living in a fog of quiet humiliation. It started subtly. Sarah, my wife of 10 years, became distant. The easy laughter that once filled our home on North Clark Street was replaced by a tense quiet. She started working late, her marketing job suddenly demanding weekend trips to Milwaukee and Indianapolis. I'd pack her bags, kiss her goodbye, and swallow the bitter taste of loneliness. Then came the small, sharp cuts, forgotten anniversary, a scoff when I tried to hold her hand walking by the lakefront. She'd hold her phone angled away from me, a nervous tick she'd never had before. When I'd ask who she was texting, she'd snap. "It's just work, Mark. Can you give me some space?" Her voice, once my comfort, became a weapon, each word a carefully aimed dart. She made me feel small, paranoid, like I was the one with the problem. The discovery wasn't a single explosion. It was a slow, agonizing burn. It began with a credit card statement I opened by mistake. A charge for a room at the Thompson Hotel on the Gold Coast, on a night she was supposed to be at a conference in Schaumburg. When I confronted her, her eyes went flat and cold. It was a block booking for the team. I stayed in my assigned room. "You checking up on me now?" She was so convincing. Her indignation so sharp that I almost believed her. I apologized. I actually apologized for my own suspicion, but the seed was planted. I started noticing things. The way she'd smile at her phone, a secret, private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The hushed phone call she'd take on the balcony, her back to the glass door. The affair partner, I learned later, was a man named David, a smug, silver-haired managing director at her firm. I saw him once, dropping her off. He drove a black Porsche, and the look he gave me as I stood on our front steps was one of pure dismissive arrogance. They felt untouchable, wrapped in their bubble of deceit. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. I'd cooked her favorite meal, a bolognese sauce that simmered for hours, trying to recapture a flicker of what we'd lost. She walked in, didn't even glance at the table, and said, "I have to go back out. Client dinner." I looked at her at the fresh makeup, the expensive dress, got the complete and utter disregard for my effort, and I just broke. The plate I was holding slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I didn't yell. I just stood there, shaking, the sound of my own heart hammering in my ears. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the city lights of Chicago a cold comfort, and I felt a part of me die. The loyal, loving husband was gone. In his place, something else was taking root. Something cold, strategic, and utterly ruthless. My revenge began, not with a bang, but with a click. The click of a keylogger I installed on her laptop. The click of a miniature GPS tracker I slipped into the lining of her suitcase. I became a ghost in my own life, gathering proof with a chilling detachment. I read their texts, filled with sickening pet names and plans for their future. A future built on the ashes of my life. I tracked her trips not to conferences, but to boutique hotels and weekend getaways with him. The carbon monoxide detector was the final piece. Found the receipt for it, purchased a week before she disabled the old one. It was a small, vicious detail, a symbol of her complete indifference to my well-being, my very life. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop who compiled a dossier that made my stomach churn. Photos, hotel receipts, even a recording of them laughing about how clueless I was. I took it all to a lawyer, a shark in a $3,000 suit on LaSalle Street. We didn't just plan a divorce, we planned a demolition. The trap was set. Sarah had been pressuring me to invest in a cantimus real estate opportunity her firm was backing. It was David's pet project. For weeks I played along, feigning interest, asking for documents, which she eagerly supplied. My lawyer and a forensic accountant found what they were looking for: securities fraud. They were using inflated projections and shell corporations to lure investors. On the day of our 10th anniversary party, a party she insisted we have to keep up appearances, the trap sprang. We were surrounded by her colleagues, her friends, our family. I stood up to give a toast. I started by talking about our 10 years together, my voice steady. Then I looked directly at her, my eyes like ice. "But it seems my greatest investment wasn't in this marriage," I said, my voice ringing through the silent room. It was in discovering the truth. On cue, 2 uniformed officers and 2 men in sec jackets walked through the door. They walked past me, straight to Sarah and David. The public exposure was brutal. She was fired, her professional license was suspended, and she was facing federal charges. The divorce petition I filed cited the infidelity with irrefutable, humiliating proof which was legally served to her in the middle of the party. Her social circle evaporated overnight. She was ruined completely and utterly. The last time I saw her was in a courtroom. She looked hollowed out, a ghost of the arrogant woman who had dismissed my love so easily. There was no fire left in her eyes, only ashes. Our brownstone sold. I moved into a quiet apartment overlooking the river. Sometimes late at night, I think about that carbon monoxide detector. It was a warning of a poison I couldn't see, a silent threat that had been filling my home for months. She had tried to silence the alarm, but in the end, it was the silence itself that became the loudest sound of all. The end.